Hello and welcome to this webinar about how to make the most of the evidence that you're preparing in your application for the Princess Royal Training Awards 2017. I'm Michael Osbaldeston from the City and Guilds Group and I'm joined by the Deputy Chief Assessor, Debbie Betteridge. Hello Debbie, are you with us?
I am, Michael, and good morning to you and to all of our participants.
Thank you, Debbie, and a very warm welcome to everybody who's been able to join us today for this webinar. We're glad that you've been able to come along and be part of it. I'm also joined by my colleague Remy in the office here in the City of London, who is looking after the technology and making sure that everything works as indeed it should do. So during the course of this webinar, what we're going to do is explore the need for relevant evidence. And we'll discuss what the assessors are looking for. And in fact, we had a session with our assessors last week, and we were looking at last year's applications and learning things about those. So we've got some good ideas and fresh ideas about that. We'll also share some top tips with you. And of course, we will answer any questions that you might have during the course of this webinar. Now, just to remind you, the applications planner is there on the screen at the moment. That's an absolutely crucial document. It shows you what the criteria are and the scoring. It gives you a structure with which to prepare your narrative. And narrative's a really important part of writing an application. I was judging other awards yesterday, and one of the things that struck me, they weren't these awards, a different set of awards that I'm involved in, that most of the applications didn't come across as a narrative. They came across as bits of information joined together. So if you can create a narrative, then it's actually much better for the assessor. And of course, that document will help you plan your answers and give samples and examples of the sort of evidence that you might want to add. And to remind you that the Princess Royal Training Awards are focused around 3 hallmarks of excellence. They're aimed at organisations of all sizes from all different sectors, and evidence that impact of training on the organisation, impact of learning and development on the organisation in all sorts of different ways, and we'll talk about that later on. It's a standard of excellence, so therefore we're not looking for a winner. We're looking for organisations and companies, whether in the public sector, the private sector, or in the third sector, being able to evidence the fact that their learning and development has impact on their organisation. So you reach a standard. We're not looking for a winner on this occasion. It's not how these awards work. So the 3 hallmarks, that training and learning and development are integral to the business and to the organisation, that they're embedded within it, part of the DNA. We need evidence of that. That the programme that's been designed and delivered has been so efficiently and effectively, and it addresses a particular need identified within the organisation. And of course, at the end of the day, we want to see the most important part, which is the impact of success on the organisation and its people that learning and development, that training has had in addressing that particular business need. So that's what the Princess Royal Training Awards are all about, and we're delighted in the second year in the interest that's been shown already in the awards, and we're pleased to be able to help. And it's a very important part of the awards to give people support and help. It's not an award where we're looking to find fault. It's an award where we're looking to try and encourage people to present the very best they can so that we can showcase the really good work that's going on across organisations of all sizes, of all natures across the whole of the United Kingdom. So I'm going to move on now to Debbie, and I'm going to ask her to tell us as a Deputy Chief Assessor and as one of the assessors of the awards, what's the purpose of providing evidence in an application form, Debbie?
Well, yes, thank you, Michael. We as an assessor team see the evidence as a very important component of the whole application. And it's there to support the statements and the narratives that you make in that application. It really is important that there is a clear link between those statements and the narrative and your evidence. And what you want to be doing with this evidence is whetting the assessor's appetite, encouraging that assessor to want to find out more. And just to reinforce what Michael said, it's not a competition, but actually the person that you are working with and about is yourself, your individual beneficiaries of the learning and your organisation. And we want to be able to see all this in your application.
Thank you, Debbie. And how does the evidence fit into the application process? What is it that it does?
Well, it's really, really important that the statements you provide in the written section are cross-referenced to the evidence. And as you said, Michael, and I'm sure we'll remind people again later, there is some really good examples in the planner of what that evidence might be. So the evidence really reinforces these statements, brings them alive, and they spark the interest of the assessor. So when the assessor sees that evidence, they really get a sense that something really worthy has been happening here, and therefore what you're trying to do is want them to come and pay you a visit, to move to that validation stage. And as I mentioned earlier, from an assessor's point of view, the evidence brings the application to life. It reinforces the written word and really does start to shape up the story that you're wanting us to consider in terms of the awards.
And it's very important, Debbie, isn't it, to keep that wow factor in the application form and within the evidence.
Yes, it is, and it is that wow factor, the journey, what's happened. Maybe we could use the word an audit trail, Michael, of what actually has taken place and the benefits, the impact that this training and development has yielded, both for individuals and organisations. And that again, that wow factor is something we are seeking. We're seeking to really look for this evidence to support your application.
Now, a moment ago, Deb, you spoke about the validation visit. It's very much part of the process. We do a sort of paper-based assessment first of all, and then a moderation process, and then following that, a validation visit for those that get through the first stage. Just tell us a bit about the validation visit, can you please?
Well, from an assessor team's perspective, this is a very important next stage of the whole process, Michael. It really is important that people understand what happens at the validation visit. So first of all, it's an opportunity for the assessors to meet with you and your key colleagues. And indeed, they will probably give quite a steer to who it is they would particularly like to meet. But of course, there are others that you might want also for them to see, to meet with and to talk to. It is important that assessors get the opportunity to meet with those who have directly benefited from the training program. And going back to an application coming alive, Michael, from my experience, when you actually start to talk with those people who have benefited, often that's when the real value of this learning and development shines through. So really important that's made available. And the third thing that the visit includes, this is where the assessor actually confirms all of the evidence that you've presented. So you will have presented probably a very small part of the evidence, and this is an opportunity for the assessor to go into more depth, to actually look at the evidence in more depth and to look at it in the context of relating it to the program and, more importantly, its impact. So those three key elements are very important for the validation process, Michael.
I think, Debbie, that helps us just contextualise how the evidence and the validation visit fit together and what we're looking to do when we come and do those visits. I have to say that from last year's experience, the validation visits are enjoyable, interesting, fascinating, and really amazing insights into work that's going on across the various applicants that we go and look at. So certainly for me, it was one of the highlights of last year, being able to take part in those validation visits. And with each of the assessors, when they go out, there will be somebody from the City and Guilds group. There'll be one we call them ambassadors, because we know it's just such a fantastic opportunity to talk to people at grassroots level as to what they're doing. So moving on on to some do and don'ts, because it's quite important. The experience as an assessor, you'll understand this better than most. What are the real do's that you have to make sure that when you're attaching evidence to your application form? What are the real do's, Debbie?
Well, it's really this link between the actual evidence that you're presenting and the statements. And the evidence needs to be relevant. So it's really make that tight, make that link very clear, and make sure that you don't get overexcited in terms of putting in things that don't really match to those statements. So it's a good thing to keep going back and checking your selection of evidence that you are presenting. It is about keeping focused. And the thing is, you can say that there will be more evidence available. So if you are only presenting a very small part of the bigger picture of the evidence, that would be enough if you got a validation visit for an assessor to be able to come in and ask to see the bigger picture around that piece of evidence, to look at more depth. And that works really well, Michael, from the assessor's point of view. And don't forget, it is important that referencing, that linking, to really say what your evidence is and make that clear.
And I think it's the point you just made, Debbie, is a really important one. It's citing that evidence in the document, isn't it? Yeah. So that when the assessor comes out on the validation visit, they can ask to see it. Because if it's not in the application form, it doesn't exist as part of the application. So make sure that in the text there is reference to the fact there is more to see, and you cite that. Now this year we've actually changed the rules a little bit on the Princess Royal Training Awards for 2017. We've adopted a much more level playing field for all applicants. Last year, it has to be said, we were rather inundated with a large amount of attachments for some people's applications, which were very difficult to process and very difficult to sort of extract what people were trying to say from. So this year there is a limit of 1 document per hallmark, and that document can't be more than 2 megabytes and shouldn't be more than 500 words. And in fact, we can't follow external links either, and that's quite important. So this makes it fairer for all the applicants. People have to gather together in that 1 document the evidence they want to present per hallmark. But like Debbie said, you can cite that there's more evidence that's going to be available on the validation visit, but at the stage where you present the application, it means that we limit the amount of that can be attached to each application form. And in some ways that's harder because people have to be more self-critical and present exactly what's necessary, but in many other ways it's much fairer because it means that everybody's competing on a level playing field. Although people aren't competing against each other, it means that when the assessors come to do the work, they know what they can expect with each of the application forms. So if those are the do's, Debbie, let's go on to the don'ts. What are the don'ts when it comes to the evidence?
Well, there is a danger of repetition. So again, it's rereading, looking at the statements and the narrative and what you're actually saying in that text. And make those words, because there is a word count in the actual application, so make those words count really. And please don't attach irrelevant materials, and again that's about not getting too excited and putting too much stuff there that assessors really can't relate to the application. I think the limiting of the evidence to evidence sized per hallmark is going to be very helpful there, Michael, because what it does mean is that people do need to select that evidence and not just put anything basically in that they want to. Very important that that selection of evidence relevant to the statements takes place.
And that usually picks up the point, I think, Debbie, that one of the very positive pieces of feedback we received last year from the organisations who were unsuccessful was the feedback provided by the assessors against their application forms and the evidence that they presented to us. And we know that a lot of organisations who were unsuccessful learnt a great deal from that sort of information that was provided back to them by the assessors, and this way we'll be able to target that information and provide even better quality feedback, because the amount that we'll have to work on will be slightly less. So I think if you're wondering what sort of supporting evidence, then there are some great examples in the application planner, and you can download that from the right hand side of the webinar screen. You can also email us your questions, of course, which we'll pick up later on in the webinar. But now we're going to move on to some of the more of the nitty-gritty. So Debbie, so what sort of things should you include as part of that essential evidence in your application form?
Well, that's quite a rich list that everyone is seeing, from business metrics through to testimonials from staff, customers, etc. So we're looking for that qualitative alongside that quantifiable evidence that you can use to match to those statements. It is important that you are selecting again the right business metrics, the right charts and graphs, and that you're making sure that it's very clear when another set of eyes looks at this, that it's clear what that evidence is saying. So heading things up, referencing, as I've already said, is important. The testimonials from staff and customers, again, it's important to be selective, but again, this is another element where it comes alive, and this is where we can pick on those and maybe then follow through at a validation visit, talking with people and getting that more detail from them face to face. But those are the typical examples, and as Michael said, in the planner there is a lot more detail related specifically to each hallmark. So I would encourage everybody to look at that, to look at the evidence you believe you have, and select and label the right pieces.
And I think one of the other things we're very aware of, Debbie, is that different sorts of organisations, different sizes of organisations working in the purely commercial sector, the public sector and the third sector are applying. So we do appreciate and understand, don't we, that people will be able to present different sorts of evidence depending where they're coming from. Perhaps you can just talk us through that a little bit.
Yes, I mean, one of the things that we as the Assessor team do is very much look to the context and appreciate the different context. And because we are looking at each application individually, for us that context, the size, all of those things is very important. And therefore, from an evidence point of view, we fully appreciate that some evidence is going to be different for different organisations, and therefore the list that people are looking at and the list of types of evidence within the planner very much focuses on people selecting the type of evidence that they feel is best to represent their learners and their organisation. And I suppose to say not to be afraid of using qualitative testimonials from staff and customers, as long as they very closely link. And then if a validation visit is achieved, then we can follow that up. So I think we're very skillful at appreciating the differences in the types of applications we're going to be looking at.
And I think I'd like to say from the Sitting Eagles Group point of view is that the preparation of the assessors, and the assessors are a team of professional people who have got significant experience in assessing all sorts of different awards. The work that we do and the work that you as the Deputy Chief Assessor and the work that Paul, the Chief Assessor, does with those teams of assessors is about helping them understand the range of appropriate evidence within the programme.
Yes, and I think it's true to say, Michael, the experience we gained from last year really illustrates that range. And again, you know, we were able through the visits to unpick all that different types of evidence as long as you said it was cited in the application.
Lovely. Well, just moving on to what to avoid. Debbie, what don't you assessors want to see?
Well, a frustration is hyperlinks, really, Michael, because actually we can't follow the hyperlink. So I suppose that's an example of saying what that evidence is, and then we can perhaps follow that through to validation. But hyperlinks really are no good. And be very, very selective around photos. I'll take photos first. Because of the size now and the amount of evidence you can include, photos can take up a lot of space. And again, this is something you can talk about, you can cite in your application, and then at a visit we can look at photos, we can look at videos, as long as they have been cited in the application. And again, it can be and can form a vital part of your presentation. We do ask that at a validation visit, that visit starts off with a presentation. So there's things in there you can include. So please cite them in the application, and then we can pick up on that and follow it through. But those are the most frustrating things, Michael, because they really do not add value to the application.
I think that's really useful, Debbie, and I think, as I was saying, I was assessing some awards yesterday, and the lack of evidence was something which concerned me about that particular piece of work I was doing. And relevant evidence is powerful and useful. Irrelevant evidence, of course, is just distracting. And again, just to remind people that we have this limit this year on 1 document per hallmark, 3 megabytes per attachment, with a maximum of 500 words on that on each of the attachments. And that's like we say, is bringing a level playing field to all applicants, and it's also helping the assessors do their work more carefully, I think, because what they have to look at is targeted and specific, and I think that's important. So don't forget, if you're on the webinar, you can send us your questions by linking onto the right hand side of the screen and typing your questions, and at the end of the webinar we will pick those up, and Debbie and myself and possibly Remy will answer those questions. Top tips, Debbie, what are the top tips that you want to share with all the people on the webinar today? And don't forget, people, you can actually, this will be online in a couple of days time, so you can always come back and listen to it, and we will send a link out to this webinar and to where it is on the website after we've done the webinar today. So top tips, Debbie.
Okay, well, thanks, Michael. I think it's, first of all, when you've selected your evidence, it's make sure there are clear headlines to describe each piece of information. It's just, again, making it very clear to the assessor where this fits and what they're actually unpacking and looking at from it. If you have any lengthy documents that you think really are relevant to your application, it's important that you cut and paste or copy and paste key extracts from it. So again, it gives us a flavour of what it is that we then could follow through at a validation and look at the more lengthy document then. Tables and graphs are a really good way of evidencing things, but again, keep it to the most relevant information. Really useful to be able to share with the assessor your before the training and after the training situation, and making it clear that's what you're presenting. If possible, highlight key information in colour, particularly if you really want it to stand out and you're worried that it might get lost. So again, assessors will be seeing this, it will draw their attention, and they will then be able to relate that to the wider and the bigger application. And finally, it is keep it short, concise and easy to read. I think it's important that you understand that people will really be scrutinising and working through your application with interest, and they want to get those key messages, and so concise and easy to read is a very helpful element in an application. And so, I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Debbie. That's extremely helpful. And those top tips, I think, are good tips for everybody to follow when they're making their application for the Princess Royal Training Awards. I suppose, to put simply, and we've discussed this several times, this is what we're looking for is, why did you do it, how did you do it, and what was the impact? So those three questions are the key questions in compiling your application form. Why did you do it, how did you do it, and what was the impact? And the evidence, as Debbie said earlier, is the audit trail. It's the record of the changes that have taken place during the course of the things that you're putting forward for an award. And of course, if you're successful, you will join some famous names, Bentley Motors, for instance, and then those sort of organisations range from the public sector to the private sector to the third sector. So big organisations like IBM and Bentley through to small engineering companies like Dale Power Solutions and Green Lighting, and again in the public sector, the work that the National Museums in Northern Ireland did was fascinating and invigorating. So, and you could even join the Donkey Sanctuary, who do some amazing work with their volunteers, and they have hundreds of them. So being part of the Princess Royal Training Award community means that you are one of the organisations wanting to showcase and share the best practice of training and learning development that's going on across the United Kingdom. And the standard of excellence means that we're selecting people to be part of that wider community who are prepared to share their learnings and encourage other organisations and companies develop how they've used their staff and prepared their staff to face changes. And we live in a very changing environment economically, socially, in many other different ways. So there is much to celebrate, and we're hoping to celebrate even more this year through these awards. And just to remind you of some of the timetables that are useful to know, the closing date is the 31st of March. So you need to get your application in good time for the 31st of March. We then go through the assessment process and then the validation process, and we announce those who've been successful in August. The final part of the process of gaining an award is the commission, the Princess Royal Training Awards Commission, and in fact Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal sits on that commission and is part of the group of people who make the final adjudication as to who receives one of her awards. And it has to be said, she's been deeply involved in the process right from the beginning when we set these awards up, and she continues to be an advocate of skills and the impact that skills and training and development has in the workplace. She's very much part of that adjudication panel, and we welcome her support and the work that she does alongside the Sitting Guilds group in promoting learning and development and the impact that it can have. Well, we're here to help. Here are photographs of my colleagues Julie and Remy. Remy sat opposite me in London on a rather grey day today, but the team are here to help. There's an email address, there's a website, there are phone numbers. We are keen to encourage and enable you to be successful. So do get in touch if we can be of any help whatsoever in developing your application. We can't write it for you, that's not our job, but we can certainly help you if you have queries and questions. So we've got some questions coming in, and I'm just looking up at the screen at the moment. Can the supporting evidence that does not exceed 2 megabytes be in the form of a graph? So can the supporting evidence be in the form of a graph? Graphs are really important. Debbie, do you want to just tell us about how important graphs are?
Yes, Michael, it's a very a good way, if you have this, to be able to present a graph. And again, if it is, make sure it's clearly labelled, but again, it can clearly show an assessor quite quickly key elements that are important for them to be seeking in terms of confirmation and underpinning of what the statements are within the actual application. So yes, definitely graphs and tables are a good way to illustrate that.
Yeah, and we've had a question which asks, would you be disadvantaged if you didn't have charts and graphs and data? Well, I think the answer to that is it depends on the type of organisation you are and what sort of application you're presenting. Just run us through that, Debbie.
Yes, it goes back to what I was saying, that from an assessor team's perspective, we appreciate there will be a whole range of different types of evidence. And the thing we are keen to see is the relationship between that evidence and what you are telling us overall in your application. That's the key bit, really, Michael. And if you are able to present to us evidence which shows the situation as it was before the training and then the situation following the training, again, that gives us a really good link to be able to start to see what the impact and what the benefits have been.
And just to clarify, it is 2 megabytes. I may have had a slip of the tongue earlier on, but it's 2 megabytes. It's not 3 megabytes, so that you can't come back and say Michael said 3. It's 2 megabytes is the maximum of for each of the hallmarks with the 500 words, yeah. And yeah. In fact 1 document each. Is there any kind of format we prefer, Word or PowerPoint? I think that's probably driven by the size of file. You've only got 2 megabytes. Yeah. Debbie, what's easiest to look at for the assessors?
Actually, Michael, it's either. I think it's fair to say the assessor team does not have any preference of type of evidence. Again, we want to see its relevance to your application. That's the key. And the thing about a PowerPoint, I suppose you can link everything together in a document, but really, as long as your evidence relates to your statements and your narrative, that's what assessors are seeking.
That's good, thank you for that. And last year we had well over 100 applications, the Princess Royal Training Awards, and we awarded 34 awards at the end of the day, so we think that was a good way of doing it. It is of course free to enter. There is no cost in terms of entering the awards, nor is there any cost in attending the event when we celebrate those who've been successful. And last year we were fortunate to be able to go to St James's Palace, and Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal presented the Princess Royal Training Awards for 2016 at St James's Palace. And again, there is no cost to attend that event, and there is, and you know, we welcome hosting successful organisations, just as we welcome providing evidence, providing support to all those who are applying. So we have no more questions now, so I'm going to wrap up. But first of all, I'm going to say thank you very much to all those of you who've been on the webinar today. We hope that you are successful in your application. We offer you our support and guidance in working towards that success. Thank you to Remy, who's been looking after the technology for us again at this webinar, so thank you, Remy. And thank you, Debbie. And do you have any final comment to make, Debbie, as the Deputy Chief Assessor?
Just to say, Michael, how much myself and the assessor team are now looking forward to receiving those applications, and it is a privilege actually to be able to go through them and to read the stories. And just linking to what you said about the event last year, it is about celebrating success, and that's what the assessor team are looking for, those successes, and really want to be able to recognise and celebrate those.
Well, thank you, Debbie, and thank you for everything you've done on the awards so far, and thank you for joining us on the webinar today. And on behalf of the Princess Royal Training Awards team and all of us here at the Sitting Hills Group, can I bid you all a good day and look forward to receiving your applications by the 31st of March at the absolute latest. Goodbye.